You're listening to the Last Signal Radio, and if this broadcast is reaching you through the layers of static and atmospheric distortion, then whatever shelter you're clinging to is still holding, and whatever is left of the surface hasn't found you yet. So stay where you are. Stay still. Stay cold. Stay silent. Silence is survival now. Silence is the only shield left in a world where sound has become the deadliest weapon. The creatures that erased the old world didn't fall from the sky, or rise from myths, or descend from cosmic rifts. They came from here, from deep under the crust, from ancient pockets of heat and pressure and radiation where no human machine could ever reach. They evolved in crushing darkness where metal would collapse and flesh would vaporize. Yet, in those impossible conditions, they developed sensory organs, sharper than anything alive on the surface, ears built to hear the planet breathing, bones tuned to the rhythm of earthquakes, echolocation, refined through millions of years of isolation, while humanity lived blind above them, unaware that something older and hungrier was listening. The first emergence was mistaken for a quake, just another tremor on a restless planet. But the vibrations kept growing, and the ground swelled and cracked, and the temperature rose in waves until the crust tore open, and the first creature pushed through, scales radiating heat like molten glass, chemical vapors pouring from its throat each breath, a furnace primed to ignite the fire. They release comes from twin internal reservoirs, one storing an oxidizer that corrodes anything it touches, the other holding a volatile pressurized fuel mixture when expelled together. The reaction is instant. A blast hotter than industrial furnaces, a streak of burning compounds that cling to whatever they hit, melting structures, dissolving bodies, turning cities into bubbling pits of blackened metal. But fire wasn't the extinction blow. Sound was humans did the rest. Alarms blared, sirens screamed, engines roared, evacuation orders crackled through loudspeakers. Jets thundered overhead, people shouted, cried panicked, and every vibration, every syllable, every pulse of electricity was a beacon, bright as the sun, to creatures built to hunt by sound. Their auditory chambers perceive frequencies above and below anything humans can generate: the hum of a lamp, the buzz of a phone, the tremor of a footstep, the heartbeat of a terrified survivor hiding under rubble. Each one is a locator, a signal, flare, a direct path to the source. The first mistake humanity made was assuming the creatures were coordinating. The second mistake was running en masse, fleeing cities in massive heat clusters, creating sound storms that attracted predators from miles away. The creatures didn't strategize. They didn't plan. They didn't need intelligence to tear civilization apart. Instinct alone was enough power. Grids overloaded and died. Communications were snuffed out. Towers melted into slag highways, turned to black glass rail lines, twisted like wire aircraft, vaporized mid-air under chemical bursts. Hospitals, shelters, command centers all lit up like bonfires in the creature's sensory range, and every one of them fell. The atmosphere is now saturated with chemical residue. Sunlight is choked by smoke, turning skies into permanent twilight. Dragon lung is killing survivors. One breath at a time, a corrosive, slow-burning decay caused by microscopic compounds left over from their flames, which settle into every corner of the world, invisible, but deadly breathing raw air. Now is a gamble, with odds close to zero. The environment is deforming, ecosystems, collapsing forests, burned oceans, blistering storms, turning acidic soil, poisoned rivers boiling, Even if every creature died this second, the planet would remain broken for decades, maybe centuries. The radio transmitter you're hearing is buried under layers of torn metal and shattered concrete. In an underground cavity that was once part of a transit system, everything here runs on insulated components. Every vibration muffled, every watt rationed, every movement kept to a minimum. No lights, no fans, no exposed heat. Anything that hums risks detection. The creatures pass overhead regularly, wings churning the air. Their echolocation pulses reach deep into the earth, mapping the ground in waves of pressure, searching for hollows, searching for movement, searching for breath. They remember feeding zones. They return to them, marking territories that stretch across entire regions. Nothing escapes their memory. Cold climates slow them. Reports suggest freezing temperatures destabilize the chemical reactions in their glands, causing their fire to sputter or implode inward. They avoid those regions or die crossing them, but reaching cold safety requires crossing the open, and open ground is death sound, travels farther heat. Radiates brighter movement, becomes a beacon. This transmission exists for one purpose: to warn, to explain, to leave behind knowledge for anyone still listening. Anyone who might find this frequency tomorrow or years from now. Never run, never shout, never slam anything, never expose heat, never activate unshielded electronics, never assume silence means safety. Silence only means they're listening. The world belongs to what crawled out of the earth now. But if you can hear this, then something human still persists. Stay low, stay cold, stay silent. The creatures don't see you, they hear you. This broadcast continues until the power fades or the walls fail, whichever comes first. If this signal reaches you, then you are still alive in a world where sound has become death, and silence is the only survival mechanism. The creatures that dominate the surface hunt not by sight, but by hearing. Every vibration, every tremor, every footstep, every mechanical hum is a map to them. The first days of collapse proved this beyond doubt. Jets and helicopters scrambled as if coordinated militaries could strike them down. But the creatures ignored the sky. They tracked the vibrations of engines, the pulses of sirens, the movements of fleeing humans, and every attempt to flee or fight amplified their presence. The technology humans relied on to survive became the beacon of annihilation. Sirens that once warned became signals that directed the hunt, and streetlights that illuminated pathways for escape, illuminated the prey for creatures whose auditory perception extends far beyond any human understanding. Their echolocation pulses can detect the smallest variations in air density and track movement even through walls the buildings relied on for safety, became resonance chambers broadcasting exact locations, and every emergency response only worsened the situation. The first evacuation waves created corridors of noise immediately exploited by instinct-driven predators. Within hours, entire districts were turned into feeding grounds. Entire cities evacuated into smoldering rubble. Those who hid underground quickly learned that sound travels through solid matter. The vibrations of footsteps or generators, or even whispers, could be triangulated and mapped across hundreds of meters, allowing the creatures to descend directly into shelters from above. This is why any mechanical device or electronic tool must be muffled or disabled entirely, and every breath must be measured, every movement calculated. Every heartbeat controlled, because the faintest fluctuation can betray a position. Yet humans did not initially comprehend the scale or sophistication of their sensory adaptations. because they evolved in isolation for millions of years under conditions of extreme pressure, heat, and radiation, creating organs capable of processing frequencies unimaginable to human ears. The creatures are attracted to heat, as well as noise. The body, heat of large groups of fleeing humans forms an infrared beacon over miles. The chemical composition of their fire does not dissipate instantly, instead leaving a lingering cloud of corrosive particles that harms the environment and contributes to dragon lung, which progressively burns the lungs of anyone breathing the residue. Even days after the flames have passed, first responders and military units attempting to intervene quickly found themselves ineffective. Conventional weapons, failing against armor, hardened over eons, their fire-resistant scales shrugging off explosions that would have vaporized any terrestrial creature, and nuclear detonations had no measurable effect. The creatures simply moved through irradiated zones, unharmed. Some evidence suggests they thrive in higher radiation environments, where humans are least capable of surviving, which explains why their emergence coincided with geological anomalies in radioactive zones. The infrastructure that once enabled society to function collapsed entirely. Power grids failed, cities became unlit tombs, communication networks went silent, transportation ground to a halt. Hospitals and emergency services ceased operations within days. Panic-driven migrations created heat and sound corridors that the creatures exploited without effort. This was not a coordinated war. They do not strategize. Instincts alone caused global devastation. Environmental consequences compounded rapidly. The chemical fires they produce release particles into the air that block sunlight and create acid precipitation, disrupting weather patterns. Forests burned, rivers, boiled oceans began acidifying, and the air itself became a weapon. Every inhalation potentially lethal. The world quickly shifted from an industrial ecosystem to a raw battleground of biology and survival. Even the smallest communities left untouched by direct attack faced secondary consequences from air and water contamination and destabilization of local food chains and agriculture, and the few humans who survived in extreme cold regions found temporary refuge because freezing temperatures interfere with the chemical mechanism of the fire. The reaction sputters or fails entirely, causing creatures to avoid those zones or fall if they try to cross them. But the journey to frozen refuges requires exposure to open terrain, and open ground is death, because every step creates vibrations, every breath emits heat, and any equipment emits detectable electromagnetic signals. Even a single miscalculation can reveal a position the predators occupy not only the surface, but also memory networks. Feeding zones they establish are revisited months later, territories mapped in instinctual memory, and no location is forgotten. Every feeding ground becomes a permanent hazard with lifespans measured in centuries. Slow reproduction ensures populations persist for decades, making human recovery increasingly unlikely. And even if the creatures were eliminated tomorrow, the environmental damage they caused through fire chemical residue and atmospheric disturbance may never be reversible. The acid rain smoke clouds, scorched soil, and poisoned water create conditions unsuitable for agriculture or habitation. Survivors who record and transmit these observations do so to provide guidance for anyone still listening, to explain survival rules, to describe sensory abilities, and to warn that the world has shifted irrevocably, that the predators are not invaders. They are returning apex species, reclaiming their ancient home. All human civilization was destroyed by instinct, amplified by modern density and technology. Not intention, sound is death. Heat is risk. Motion is betrayal. Only patience, silence, and careful observation will allow life to persist under wings and fire. The ruins stretch as far as the eye can perceive. Not that vision matters when survival depends on sensing everything beyond sight. The landscape is a patchwork of scorched cities, blackened forests, molten rivers and twisted metal. Everything. Humanity built, reduced to ash and warped steel. The fire they breathe lingers in the air as a chemical cloud, corrosive and insidious. Every inhalation burns the lungs, and over days becomes dragon lung, a condition that takes the breath in small increments until the body can no longer function. The creatures move constantly. Their memory is long, and territories permanent once a feeding ground is discovered. It is revisited months later. Their instincts map the world, and humans are nothing more than moving heat signatures and vibrations that betray their hiding places. The panic of the first weeks amplified their efficiency. Humans running from one area to another created corridors of sound and heat that drew them in with absolute precision. Buildings that once offered protection became instruments of detection. The walls resonated with every step, every whisper, every thump of machinery, and even underground shelters were not safe. The vibrations transmitted through concrete and soil to the creatures' sensitive hearing, and those who tried to barricade themselves inside quickly realized silence was the only defense. Generators muffled beneath layers of insulation. Minimal movement, careful breaths, nothing left uncontrolled, or it would be traced. The environmental impact compounded the danger. The fires released chemicals into the atmosphere that blocked sunlight, altered weather patterns, and created acid precipitation, rivers, boiled forests. Incinerated soils turned into blackened glass. Even if the creatures were gone, the world would remain hostile for decades. Some survivors reached the far north, where extreme cold interfered with the chemical reaction in the creatures' glands. Their fire sputtered or failed entirely, and cold regions became temporary refuges. But reaching them required crossing open ground that magnified every heartbeat, every motion, every electromagnetic emission, and a single misstep meant instant detection and death. The scale of destruction was planetary and relentless. There was no pause, no exhaustion, no mercy. The creatures do not hunt for sport. Instinct drives them. They do not strategize. Yet the effect was apocalyptic. Every city fell within days. Power grids collapsed. Communication networks vanished. Transportation froze. Hospitals emptied, and emergency services ceased functioning. The first responders and military units attempting resistance found their weapons useless. Conventional arms failed. Armor resisted chemical burns. Explosions had no effect. Nuclear strikes were absorbed without harm. The creatures thrived in radiation zones where humans were least capable of surviving, and yet the world did not end in a single day. It unraveled systematically. A biological correction amplified by human activity. The environmental collapse was simultaneous. Atmospheric pollution from chemical fires blocked sunlight, created acid rains. Forests burned, rivers boiled, oceans acidified, and the chemical residue in the air became a slow-moving killer. No corner of the planet remained untouched. Even the survivors in remote areas faced contaminated water, poisoned soil, disrupted food chains, and collapsing ecosystems. The New World Order was brutal and enduring. Their lifespans, measured in centuries, slow reproduction, ensured populations remained stable for decades, meaning the predators were a permanent presence. Humans would never reclaim the surface quickly. Even if all creatures were removed, the ecological damage alone would prevent a return to civilization, as it was before the surface became a realm of predators, a world dominated by heat, sound, and fire. and humans reduced to shadows, moving silently where possible. Every action calculated and every exposure minimized, survival depended on studying behavior, understanding the senses, the chemical reactions, the memory of feeding grounds, and planning every movement to avoid detection. The creature's memory is instinctual and perfect. A feeding zone visited once will be targeted again and again over years, and human activity only reinforces their patterns. The creatures are not invaders. They are returning apex species. The planet was theirs long before humans existed, and every attempt to resist only accelerated the collapse. Humanity's downfall was inevitable, not because of lack of courage or ingenuity, but because instinct meets density and technology, and humans provided both in excess, and now the world continues under wings and fire, with survivors forced to adapt in silence, isolation, fear, constant observation, and patience. And the only lessons to be learned are the rules of movement, exposure, and heat, and the acknowledgement that life now exists in a shadow of what was a planet reclaimed by its oldest predators, where noise is death and stillness is the only path forward. Everything that moves produces a signal. Everything that breathes emits heat. Everything that hums or clicks or flashes can be traced, and every misstep can be fatal. Silence has become the only form of defense and patience. The only strategy generators are buried under layers of insulation. Every vibration dampened, lights are minimized. Movement is measured, each step calculated, each breath controlled, because the creatures above are listening. They map the vibrations. They map the heat, the electromagnetic signals. They remember feeding zones. They return months later, their territories permanent, and their memory flawless. Humans were never equipped to understand senses evolved over millions of years, in deep isolation, organs tuned to detect the subtlest fluctuations in air pressure, vibrations. Imperceptible to the human ear, thermal signatures, invisible to the naked eye, electrical currents and radio frequencies, now all deadly beacons during the first days of collapse. Panic amplified their efficiency. Mass evacuations created heat and sound corridors. Entire cities emptied only to be replaced with fires and smoke that formed chemical clouds that further devastated the environment. Every breath inhaled from these clouds causes dragon lung, a progressive internal burn that incapacitates survivors over days and nights. Those who survived underground discovered that sound travels through solid matter. Vibrations of footsteps, equipment, even whispering can betray locations. Air ducts, walls, and floors transmit these signals directly to the creatures. Above the landscape is a mixture of scorched earth, blackened cities, twisted metal, and burning forests. The world is no longer recognizable as the one humans built. Agriculture has collapsed. Rivers are contaminated, storms are unpredictable, soil poisoned, and even if the predators were eliminated, the chemical damage left behind would make recovery slow or impossible. The creature's presence reshapes every element of survival. Fire, chemical residue, and environmental instability redefine the rules of living and movement. Even the coldest regions offer only temporary refuge. Freezing temperatures disrupt the chemical reaction in their glands, preventing sustained fire. But reaching these areas requires crossing open terrain where every heartbeat and breath radiates like a beacon, and any exposed electronics or light risks detection. The creatures patrol constantly, gliding, silently mapping the vibrations and heat signatures below. They do not coordinate. They do not strategize. Instinct alone drives them, but instinct is enough to produce extinction-level effects. Humans are no longer apex. The creatures dominate by default, and the survivors who remain must adapt to the patterns of the hunters observing, understanding, and predicting movements, their lifespan measured in centuries. Their populations stable for decades, meaning they will remain a threat far longer than humans can endure. Recovery is measured in years, and even then risk persists. The old world does not exist, and human technology is a liability. The patterns humans create through sound, movement, and heat are used against them. Instinct mapped onto density is unstoppable. Every city, every road, every power grid, every machine once relied upon to survive became a signal announcing locations, and now the landscape is rewritten. The old markers mean nothing. Territory is defined by survival and exposure. Risk. Each settlement is temporary. Every safe point, conditional silence, patience, and observation are the only laws. Movement must be deliberate and minimal exposure. Critical, any miscalculation results in instant detection. The memory of feeding zones ensures repeated targeting over time. Survival requires tracking these patterns, understanding instinctual routes, and never assuming a place is safe, even if the creatures have not been seen in months. The environment is now an extension of the predator's sensory world. Every wind carries a chemical signature, every smoke plume, a location trace, every river current, a map, their memory and instincts overlay with the human-generated noise to form a deadly network. The lessons are simple, yet brutal: stillness, concealment, calculated movement, avoidance of heat, sound, and electromagnetic emissions. If you survive, it is because you have internalized these rules, because every action is measured against detection. The creatures will endure as the apex. The world will remain hostile, and human presence is contingent on mastery of avoidance. Survival is a fragile balance between exposure and invisibility. Every breath, every heartbeat, every motion is a calculation, and even the slightest lapse can result in death. These are the rules that have emerged from observation experience and necessity in a planet reclaimed by predators where instinct dominates and survival is silence. The surface is empty of human noise. The forests burned, the cities smoldering, the rivers boiling, and yet the creatures move constantly above, gliding silently, scanning vibrations, sensing heat, tracing electromagnetic pulses. Anything alive is mapped and memorized. Instinct alone drives them, yet their actions erase entire civilizations. The chemical fire lingers in the atmosphere, and its residue contaminates the soil. The water, the air, breathing becomes a slow act of calculation, each inhalation potentially deadly. Every survivor must ration movement, minimize exposure, measure every heartbeat. The ruins of highways and railways melted and twisted by fire offer no protection. They become traps for heat and sound, corridors for hunting. Instinct mapped onto human panic. Wiped out populations, entire settlements vanished in days. The generators used for light and warmth must be buried under multiple layers to dampen vibrations. Every electrical device is a beacon, every radio signal, a flare, and even the faintest hum from fans or engines can attract attention. Shelters that once seemed safe underground are vulnerable. Vibrations travel through soil and concrete to the creatures above. Walls transmit signals. Floors amplify them. Movement becomes detectable. The night carries chemical clouds from their fire, lingering for days in some regions, acid rain. Rain falls from skies darkened by particulate matter, blocking sunlight and altering temperature. Cycles. Storms appear without warning. Soil poisoned, water contaminated, and crops impossible to cultivate. The environment is a secondary killer. The cold regions offer temporary sanctuary. Freezing temperatures disrupt the chemical reaction in the glands of the creatures, preventing sustained fire. But reaching those zones requires crossing open terrain that magnifies heartbeat, motion, heat, and any electromagnetic emission, and any exposure risks, detection. Even a single misstep can be fatal. Those who survive have learned to move only when necessary to hide in insulated shelters, to avoid producing detectable heat or sound, to remain as invisible as possible. Each movement is calculated, each breath measured, and the rules extend beyond human physiology. Understanding behavior of the predators is essential. Tracking patterns, memory of feeding zones, instinctive patrols, timing of their flights, and reactions to heat or vibration. The predators remember feeding sites and revisit them. Months later, the world is permanently altered. Their presence extends for decades. Humans cannot reclaim the surface without mastering avoidance. The old world infrastructure is irrelevant. Roads, bridges, cities, hospitals, all destroyed or poisoned. Every technological system relied on in the past becomes a liability because it emits signals. The creatures detect instinct combined with human-generated noise, created annihilation. The predators are not invaders. They are returning apex species, reclaiming territories long abandoned, their lifespan measured in centuries. Slow reproduction ensures their numbers remain stable. For decades, the environmental damage from fire, chemical residue, and atmospheric alteration will persist even if all predators vanished, and every survivor exists by obeying the strict laws of concealment. Silence and patience. Their existence depends on observation and understanding of the predator's sensory world and environmental conditions. The wind carries chemical particles that mark previous feeding areas. Every smoke plume, every heated surface is mapped into their perception. The survivors must navigate a landscape entirely alien, where instinct dominates, silence governs, and any lapse can mean instant death. This is the new order of the world, where humans endure as shadows moving through ruins, avoiding detection, relying on calculated stillness, and where the only constant is the movement and memory of predators above, and even decades from now, their presence will define survival. The world belongs to them, and humans exist only by understanding and respecting the rules of invisibility and silence. The air is filled with lingering fire residue, the ground unstable, the water dangerous. Every step, every breath, every motion requires assessment. The survivors' lives have become exercises in extreme patience, in learning the memory of predators' feeding grounds, and in obeying the unbroken laws of exposure and concealment. And any human hubris that breaks these rules ends in immediate extinction. The silence of the world is both a shield and a prison. And every living survivor now understands that sound is the deadliest threat, the most visible signal. Motion, the most revealing trace and mastery of these elements, is the only path to continued existence, and the creatures above continue their patrols, never stopping, never exhausting moving. Through the scorched and poisoned surface, their instinct perfect, their memory enduring, and humans must adapt to the rhythm of predators in order to endure. The predators do not forget once. A feeding ground is discovered. It is marked in instinctual memory, and revisited months later territory is permanent and mapped in ways humans cannot perceive. Every shelter abandoned for a week may be targeted again. The movements of survivors are tracked through heat, sound, and vibrations. Humans create patterns without realizing, and instinct overlays memory on density, making escape nearly impossible. The first months proved this beyond any doubt. Mass panics created corridors of movement that the predators exploited with precision. Cities emptied in days, roads and highways became rivers of heat and sound, feeding the instinctual maps of the hunters. Even underground, the vibrations transmitted through soil and concrete revealed locations, generators, vehicles. Even whispered words became detectable signals. The environment itself amplified the danger. Chemical fires altered air density, leaving lingering clouds that carried heat and chemical residue for miles. Every breath, every inhalation. A risk survival depends on minimizing exposure, controlling every motion, and remaining still for hours or days at a time. Cold climates offered temporary reprieve. Freezing temperatures disrupted the chemical fire reaction in the predator's glands, preventing sustained flames. But reaching these areas required crossing open terrain that amplified heat, sound, and electromagnetic emissions, and a single lapse meant instant death. The landscape is scarred beyond recognition. Burned forests, blackened cities, molten rivers, twisted infrastructure. The environment no longer functions for humans. Instead, it serves as a conduit for detection. The predator's patrols continue unbroken circling regions, checking familiar feeding zones, revisiting them in cycles. Instinct reinforced by memory ensures these zones are never safe for long. Human survivors must track the predator's patterns, learn their timing, anticipate patrols, and move only when absolutely necessary. Every action calculated, every exposure risk assessed, even the faintest noise from a footstep, a breathing mask, or a powered device can betray a location. Their senses evolved over millions of years in isolation, organs capable of perceiving frequencies, vibrations, and heat beyond human comprehension. The result is a world where instinct dominates intelligence, and human survival is contingent on mastering concealment and understanding. Predator behavior: populations are small, movements limited, and decisions dictated by safety patterns. The predator's lifespans measured in centuries. Slow reproduction keeps their numbers stable and persistent for decades, making the environment perpetually dangerous. Even if the predators were removed, the chemical residue, scorched terrain, acid rain, and poisoned soil would prevent rapid recovery. Humans exist only by observing, calculating, and obeying the rules of heat, sound, motion, and exposure. Any deviation results in detection and death. The old world is irrelevant. Roads, cities, infrastructure, hospitals, communication systems, all destroyed or unusable. Technology is hazardous because electronic emissions are detectable, and every action leaves a trace. Humans must navigate a terrain completely alien, where instinct and memory dominate, and the survivors' lives have become exercises in extreme patience, discipline, and constant awareness. Each shelter, each temporary zone, must be monitored for patterns of patrol and history of feeding. The predators continue to adapt their routes instinctually and opportunistically, observing the faintest change in thermal patterns or vibrations. The human presence is now minimal, conditional, and subordinate. The world belongs to instinct and memory, while humans endure as shadows navigating the scorched, poisoned surface. In calculated silence, Observation has replaced freedom, motion replaced by necessity, and every movement is weighed against the risk of detection. The predators above are patient, perfect, persistent, and the memory of their feeding zones guarantees humans must adapt permanently or perish environmental destruction, chemical residue. Fires and acid rain will persist even if predators vanish. Humans cannot reclaim the surface easily, and survival requires obedience to the unbroken laws of exposure, concealment, and silent observation. The predator's patrols are ceaseless. Memory is perfect instinct, absolute, and the world continues under wings above and scorched earth below. The world has narrowed into corridors of survival. Every open field, every ruined city, every scorched forest presents immediate danger. The predators above scan constantly for vibrations, heat, and electromagnetic emissions. Any human movement or device risks detection. The chemical residue from their fire lingers in the air, coating lungs and surfaces, leaving toxic traces. Even weeks after a feeding, the landscape itself is hostile. Rivers, poisoned soils, acidic rains, unpredictable storms, chemical clouds drifting over kilometers. The survivors have learned to move only when necessary, to ration exposure, to monitor predator patterns, and to predict the instinctual patrols of creatures that remember every feeding ground they have ever visited. Decades and centuries of instinct have mapped territories across continents. The predators do not need strategy. They only follow biology, and human activity amplifies their efficiency. Panicked movements, corridors of fleeing humans became a global network of signals exploited instinctively. Roads, highways, even railways that once enabled transport now feed heat and vibrations directly into their mapping systems. Buildings and shelters amplify the vibrations within walls and floors, making generators. Footsteps, whispered words detectable underground, does not guarantee safety. Vibrations propagate through soil, and concrete alerting predators above to every hidden position. Even minimal heat sources create infrared beacons guiding patrols. Shelters must be insulated, and generators muffled. Every movement must be deliberate, every breath measured. The cold regions offer temporary respite. Freezing temperatures disrupt the chemical fire in predators' glands, slowing or preventing sustained flames. But reaching these zones requires crossing open terrain where heat, motion, and electromagnetic signals radiate in ways humans cannot fully control. A single misstep means instant death. The environment amplifies the predator's presence. The scorched and poisoned world is both a hunting ground and a trap. Chemical fires have changed the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, altering temperatures, creating acid rains. Unpredictable weather. Survivors in remote regions face poisoned, water-contaminated soil, failing ecosystems, agriculture. Impossible. The predators dominate by default. Humans reduced to shadows, constantly observing, calculating silence and concealment. The predators' lifespans, measured in centuries, slow reproduction, ensures their numbers remain stable for decades. Humans cannot reclaim the surface without mastering complete avoidance. Old infrastructure is irrelevant. Every road, bridge, building, hospital, or technological system once relied upon is a liability. Electronic emissions detected instantly, and every human-made vibration or heat signature becomes a beacon. Instinct overlays human-generated density, creating perfect tracking. The predators are returning apex species. The planet was theirs long before humans existed. Instinct and memory, reinforced over millennia, dominate the environment, The survivors must adapt entirely to these rules, observing, understanding, and predicting predator movements, managing heat, sound, and exposure. Every action is weighed against survival. Every step, every breath, every motion carries risk. Even slight deviation risks instant death, and the predator's patrol, relentlessly mapping the surface memory of feeding zones, ensures repeated targeting over time, and the chemical residue and environmental destruction ensures danger persists. Even if predators vanished, the old world infrastructure is irrelevant. Humans exist in the margins as shadows of their former species. The rules are clear stillness, concealment, calculated movement, observation, and respect for instinctual territories. Silence is survival, and the predators continue their relentless, ceaseless patrols above, while humans navigate a planet where every inch, every breath, every heartbeat is measured against detection and extinction. The survivors now carry the weight of observation, every step measured, every breath calculated, every movement a potential death sentence. The creatures above patrol endlessly mapping heat, vibrations, and electromagnetic emissions. Instinct overlaid with memory makes every feeding ground permanent, and every abandoned shelter dangerous again. Instinct alone drives them. But instinct scaled across continents with human density creates annihilation. Humans who survive exist only by learning the patterns of patrol, the timing of hunting routes, the memory of repeated feeding grounds, and by obeying strict rules of exposure. Silence and concealment are the only currencies of survival. Every electrical device, every motor, every vibration risks detection, even in supposed safe zones. Walls transmit vibrations, floors amplify signals, and underground shelters are not inherently secure. Generators must be muffled, lights minimized, and even whispers-controlled movement must be deliberate and calculated over hours or days. The chemical fire the predator's exhale lingers as microscopic toxic particles settling in air, soil, and water. Breathing becomes an act of constant calculation. Dragon lung is a slow, progressive internal burn from inhaling this residue, and no treatment exists. Survival depends solely on avoiding exposure to contaminated zones and minimizing breaths in open air. The environment itself has become a weapon altered by the fires, acid rain, and chemical fallout forests, burned rivers, poisoned oceans, acidifying storms, unpredictable. Every corner of the world contaminated, even remote areas carry risk. Cold regions slow the chemical reaction in the predator's glands, limiting their fire. But reaching these zones requires crossing open terrain that amplifies heat, vibration, and electromagnetic signals, and even a single misstep leads to instant detection. The world is permanently altered, infrastructure destroyed, landscapes poisoned, weather patterns unpredictable, and ecosystems collapsed. The predators persist in stable populations, reinforced by centuries of instinct, slow reproduction, and unbroken memory. Human populations are fractured and minimal, scattered in hidden enclaves relying on constant observation, prediction, and absolute stillness to survive the survivor's knowledge of predator behavior. Chemical fire, memory of feeding grounds, and environmental patterns is the only thing keeping them alive. Technology is often a liability. Electronic emissions, motors, and even passive devices can betray location. The predators do not rest. Instinct continues, ceaselessly mapping the surface. Memory ensures repeated targeting. Every zone previously visited remains dangerous for decades, and survival requires permanent adaptation. Understanding and respecting the rules of heat, vibration, motion, and chemical residue is the only chance of continued life. The world has been rewritten into a system dominated by apex predators, returning to their native environment, instinct over intelligence. Humans exist only in margins, moving carefully, shadows observing patterns, calculating exposure, and every lapse risks immediate death. The burden of knowledge is permanent. Every survivor carries it, observing the predator's patterns, learning the landscape, timing movements, rationing exposure and concealment. Every day is a test of memory, discipline, patience, and understanding. And even decades into this new reality, the predator's patrols continue. Unbroken memory is perfect instinct absolute. The world is theirs, and humans endure only by obeying the unbroken rules of survival. The remnants of humanity move in shadows, avoiding detection. Each step measured, every breath-controlled motion calculated to avoid the predators above, who patrol endlessly. Their memory flawless, every feeding ground recorded and revisited, instinct reinforced over centuries, ensures humans cannot find permanent safety. Open terrain is death. Every exposed heartbeat, every vibration, every heat signature radiates across miles, mapping the survivors like light across the landscape cities. Forests, rivers, highways, all reduced to chemical residue, scorched soil, twisted metal. The environment itself is a weapon. Every breath, every inhalation carries risk. Dragon lung progresses, silently burning lungs. Over days, survivors ration air. Movement and exposure generators buried, lights minimized, and electronics sealed because even the faintest signal can be lethal. Survival depends on complete understanding of predator behavior, timing patrols, memorizing repeated routes, avoiding known feeding zones, every action weighed against risk. The predators patrol instinctively, yet efficiently without coordination. Their biology scaled by human density created extinction-level effects. Humans are shadows, moving only when necessary. Learning patterns, timing patrols, rationing exposure, maintaining absolute silence, even underground shelters are risky. Vibrations transmit through soil and walls, revealing positions. The chemical residue from fire lingers in air, soil, water contaminating the environment for decades. And every step taken can trace survivors back to feeding zones previously discovered by instinct alone. The landscape is permanently hostile. Scorched earth, poisoned rivers, acid rains, unpredictable storms, chemical clouds drifting across kilometers. Survivors in cold regions find temporary reprieve. Freezing temperatures disrupt chemical fire in predator glands. But reaching these zones requires exposure to open terrain, exposing heat, motion, and electromagnetic signals. A single misstep is fatal. The predator's memory ensures no feeding ground is ever forgotten. Their instincts perfect and unbroken populations stable over decades. Even centuries, humans cannot reclaim the surface without mastering complete avoidance. The old world is irrelevant infrastructure. Cities, technology, hospitals destroyed or unusable. Any emission from electronics or motors becomes a deadly beacon. Instinct overlays human density, mapping movements. Humans have no advantage. The creatures are returning apex species, reclaiming their native environment. Instinct and memory dominate humans. Survive as shadows navigating ruins. Silently observation, prediction, patience, and concealment are the only tools remaining. Every inch of land calculated for risk. Every breath rationed for survival. The predators continue ceaseless patrols, memory perfect, instinct absolute, and humans endure only by understanding and obeying unbroken laws of stillness, silence, concealment, and careful motion. Every lapse means instant death. The edge of humanity is defined not by courage, ingenuity, or strength, but by adherence to the rules of exposure. Avoidance and observation, the world belongs to the predators, and humans exist only as shadows in the margins, constantly observing, calculating, and surviving under wings and chemical fire. The world continues under scorched skies, and the distant hum of wings moving relentlessly above survivors endure in silence. Each step calculated, every breath measured, every movement minimized and delayed to reduce heat, vibration, and electromagnetic emissions. The predators patrol unbroken, their instincts perfect, their memory flawless. Every feeding ground visited months or even decades ago revisited territories permanent. The survivors exist in the margins, shadows moving only when necessary, understanding patterns of patrol, timing, and memory. Every chemical fire they exhale lingers everywhere in air, soil, and water. Dragon lung spreads slowly with each inhalation, burning lungs from within. The world has been transformed into a labyrinth of danger and observation. Every ruined city, every scorched forest, every twisted highway becomes a hazard. Every movement, a test of patience and calculation. Generators, insulated walls, muffled floors, layered. Every vibration, dampened. Even the faintest mechanical noise can attract them. And now the survivors' lives are reduced entirely to observation, calculation, and patience. The cold zones offer temporary refuge. Freezing temperatures disrupt the chemical reaction in predator glands, slowing or preventing sustained flames. But reaching these zones requires crossing open terrain where heat, vibration, and electromagnetic signals radiate outward from every human presence, and even a single misstep means instant detection. The environment itself has become a weapon. Chemical residues in soil and water linger for years. Fires have scorched the land. Smoke and particulate matter block sunlight-altering weather systems. Acid rains fall unpredictably, contaminating rivers and forests. Storms arise without warning, creating hazards beyond the predators themselves. Survivors in isolated regions rely on careful mapping of terrain, of airflow, of chemical clouds, of sun angles, and wind patterns to avoid exposure. Every step taken must account for shifting residue, wind drift, and temperature changes at night. When they move is the time to travel. But even then, shadows, reflected heat, and subtle vibrations betray locations to the ever-patient apex species above. Survival depends on mastering every variable. Humans no longer act freely. Instinct overlays human density. Mapping every corridor of movement humans create, nothing escapes memory. Predators adapt their routes opportunistically while adhering to instinctual patrols. Every feeding zone previously discovered remains hazardous for decades. Humans cannot reclaim the surface without mastering complete avoidance. The old world infrastructure is irrelevant. Roads, bridges, cities, hospitals, factories, networks, all destroyed or poisoned. Even passive electronics are detectable. Every human-generated vibration recorded into the predator's sensory maps. Humans survive as shadows moving in silence, studying predator behavior, predicting patrols, timing movements, and constantly calculating exposure. Survivors ration their breathing, their steps, their energy, learning to stretch hours of immobility into days of survival. Their very existence becomes an exercise in discipline and patience. They move like ghosts over scorched earth, through ruined forests, around acidified rivers, avoiding known feeding zones, monitoring wind directions, shadows, chemical residue, and the faintest heat signature. Every lapse brings death. The predator's presence dominates every element of the environment. Memory is unbroken instinct, absolute. Every environmental change, every chemical trace, every vibration is perceived and recorded. The survivors are fragments of a species once dominant, now reduced to ephemeral shadows. The predators endure in stable populations, sustained by centuries of lifespan and slow reproduction, ensuring decades of unchallenged dominance. The landscape remains permanently altered. Scorched forests, poisoned soil, toxic water, acid rains, unpredictable weather, all reinforce the predator's advantage. Even if they vanished tomorrow, the surface would remain hostile, their fire, chemical residue, and environmental damage. A lasting legacy. Humans exist only at the margins of perception, mastering concealment, silence, and observation to survive. The rules are unbroken. Move only when necessary. Breathe only when safe. Never emit light. Minimize heat. Suppress vibrations. Avoid detection by instinct, scaled by memory. Observe constantly. Predict patrols. Ration exposure. Maintain stillness and patience above all. The world belongs to instinct, memory, and fire. Survivors continue to traverse landscapes that are alien and hostile, calculating every motion, analyzing every environmental variable, anticipating the predator's routes, remembering previous encounters, and feeding zones the burden of. Knowledge is total. Every human carries it. Every survivor learns that one wrong step, one uncontrolled breath, one excess motion, one sound can erase existence. Generators must be insulated, shelters layered, paths planned, motion rationed, shadows managed, chemical clouds and residue. Drift unpredictably, the landscape itself. A persistent threat, survival becomes a constant negotiation with environment and predator. Memory observation must be uninterrupted, patience absolute, risk assessed continuously, even decades into this new reality. The predator's patrols continue unbroken, memory perfect, instinct absolute. The survivor's experience becomes a ledger of constant learning and adaptation. Shadows of humanity now move silently in a planet reclaimed. Every ruined city, every scorched forest, every blackened highway, a reminder of hubris. Every lapse in judgment, every misstep, every noise or emission has proven lethal. The predators are returning apex species, and humans endure only by obeying the unbroken laws of survival. The world belongs to wings, to fire, to instinct, and memory. Humans exist only as fragments, learning, observing, calculating, rationing every resource, every step, every breath. Life reduced to survival and calculation. The rules are simple, yet absolute. Move only when necessary. Breathe only when safe. Conceal completely. Observe constantly. Track patterns. Understand memory and instinct. Ration exposure. Remain patient and silent. Every misstep leads to instant death. The predator's patrols are ceaseless memory, unbroken, instinct absolute. The landscape permanently altered. The air carries chemical traces. The soil is poisoned, water contaminated, forests destroyed, and weather unpredictable. Every element used against human survival. The survivors are now an adaptive species of shadows, living entirely under rules of concealment and observation. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement measured against detection and death. Silence is survival. Stillness is survival. Patience is survival. Observation is survival understanding. Predator behavior, environmental variables, memory and instinct is survival and underwings and fire. Humans endure as shadows navigating a planet reclaimed where sound is death, heat is risk, motion betrayal, and mastery of all variables is the only path to continued life. This is the last signal radio tuning off.